Do you love books but don't have time to read them? Do you wish you could listen to your favorite stories while driving, working out, or doing chores? If so, you need Audible, the world's largest library of audiobooks and podcasts. With Audible, you can enjoy unlimited access to thousands of titles across genres and categories from bestsellers to classics, thrillers, romance, fiction, and nonfiction. You can also discover new and exclusive content from Audible Originals, featuring original stories and performances by celebrities and authors. Plus, you can download your audiobooks and podcasts offline for listening anywhere, anytime, on any device. And with Audible Plus, you can get even more benefits, such as unlimited listening to select audiobooks and podcasts, free exchanges and returns, and a 30-day free trial. So what are you waiting for? Join Audible today and start your listening adventure. Visit the show notes to support the show and get your free Audible trial today. Thank you for your support.
And now, on with the show.
Gentlemen, what's a bawdy joke from a film or show you watched that went over your head as a kid?
So for me, this one was easy. Came to me immediately. It's one of the funniest jokes of all time. I can't believe they got away with it. I can't believe I saw it as a kid. And it's the joke from Animaniacs where it's the fingerprints joke from Animaniacs. I mean, just Google the clip. It's so filthy. It is truly one of the filthiest jokes I really can't believe they got away with a joke where the punchline is Dot thinks they're asking her to shove her fingers up the artist formerly known as Prince's asshole. And she, right or wrong, don't judge her. She says no thank you and throws Prince across the room. Because she would rather not fingerprints. That is just one of the funniest fucking... We used to be a country where kids' content could have something that truly just disgusting in it. And just because it's wordplay, kids aren't going to get it. But if their parents are in their room, the parents are like, ha! Oh no, wait, no. Oh god, no. Fuck, stop. Change the channel. It's unbelievable. It's really, guys, Google the clip. It's the funniest fucking thing.
So my answer when I was thinking about it, I don't know if I could necessarily nail down the bawdiest joke or the most shocking joke. So instead, what I started thinking about was a time where something went over my head as a kid, or like not even just went over. It went over my head, and like a year or two later, I would get the joke. And the thing is with bawdy jokes and kid stuff, there are kids who will ask about it, right? Like there's a famous Q&A where a little girl gets up and asks James Gunn why Star-Lord says if you had a black light, this place would look like a Jackson Pollock painting. And he goes, ask your dad, right? But the problem is the dad's not going to have an answer for that. There are a lot of like bawdy adult jokes that if a kid asks about it, the parent's just like, oh, I don't know what to do here. So I thought of this joke because I always think of the incredible recovery that my mother had when I asked about that, which is we got to see Shrek, and it was early when Shrek came out. And, it was like one of those early like pre-release, whatever the hell it was. So I'm like 10 years old when Shrek comes out. And there's a bit in Shrek where they walk by and they see Shrek and Donkey see Lord Farquaad's castle, his big tower. And Shrek goes, compensating for something to Donkey. And Donkey doesn't get it. And I remember like leaning over to my mom and going, what is that? What's that mean? Mostly because as a kid, I didn't even know what the word, as 10 years old, I didn't even know what the word compensating meant. So it's just like, what's the joke here? And my mom goes, oh, it's because he's so short. He's making up for being so short. And I just bought that entirely. And it wasn't until like 12 years old, I'm watching Shrek again. I'm like, oh, it's a penis joke. But props to my folks for having that quick recovery there to be like, I've got an explanation that'll shut the kid up and we can just move on. We could just shut the kid up and move on. Props to that. You're not doing that with the finger. What?
They weren't wrong.
No. And like, you can't do that with a fingerprints joke. With a fingerprints joke, you just have to go, But, props to them. Recovered on the Farquaad.
Just go, look at the minions!
Every year since 1989, the Library of Congress has selected 25 films to add to the National Film Registry. The criteria? The films must be culturally, historically, or aesthetically significant.
Each week on You're Missing Out, we take a look at one of these films to try and get to the heart of why they were selected and why they still matter.
This week, we're joined once again by comedian David Bluvband to discuss the 1932 film Trouble in Paradise.
Our guest today is a writer, actor, and improviser, as seen on Kaleidoscope, Hollywood, The Marvelous Mrs. Maisel, and The Chris Gethard Show. Joining us once again, David Bluvband is here on the show. David, thank you so much for joining us.
Hey, fellas. Thanks for having me on again. It's an honor to be back.
Welcome back.
It's an honor to be back and finally in person, or rather, I
Yeah.
can finally see you guys.
I was going to make that point. This is the first time we've had cameras on
First.
for this.
First visual episode. Sorry about that in advance, having to look at. Well, not me. I'm a good-looking fella, but sorry you have to look at Mike.
Yeah, that's fair.
I gotta say though, I was a little confused looking at the scheduling of everything because last week we did an episode on My Darling Clementine, which was close to a John Huston. There's something similar there, and then I'm like, wait, we're recording with David Bluvband and we're not doing a John Huston thing. What's going on? So I was just. Was there a scheduling mistake? Does he know he's not doing John Huston? Did Mike and Kyle write the wrong guest's name in the episode? Like, what's going on? But hey, as long as you're willing to be on the show, even if it's Houstonless, we're happy to have you.
Look, I'll take what I can get. We'll make it work. It's like like how they say what they used to say on Project Runway. It's a make it work moment.
It is a make it work moment. Let's try to tie it in together. I kind of see our main con man. I feel like he's got a little bit of John Huston energy to him. I feel like if John Huston was a little lower class, he'd probably be bumming around in Europe and just robbing people and just being like, no. Actually, I need to look at your tonsils. Bonk someone on the head and then rob them.
I would counter, if I'm going to tie it in, I would say, honestly, I love John Huston's films, but Maltese Falcon, Treasure of the Sierra Madre, all of them, every one of them would be improved if a befuddled Edward Everett Horton just showed up and got cuckolded in them. Like, I just want him popping in the middle of Maltese Falcon going, oh my goodness, I'm in the wrong place, and just bouncing.
Oh my God, Sam! Did you know that I was trying to see this woman before she came into your office? Oh my goodness, love that man.
I definitely feel like if John Huston could have made a comedy like an all out, like a full blown comedy, it would be something like this.
This 100% feels like something he definitely loved watching. This is before he's directing, but he's like bumming around doing writing jobs. He's So and his father's, an actor, so he's definitely into the arts. He definitely saw this movie, and he was definitely like, oh yes, a movie about lovable shitheads just robbing other lovable shitheads in Europe. This is my jam. This is like if John Huston got hold of like a Billy Wilder script.
Well, and also consider that when we think about it, when it came to American filmmaking, and I'm hardly unique in saying this, I think I heard somebody quoted on the Criterion at some point, but it was Jean Renoir said it actually. On the Criterion disc for Trouble in Paradise, Peter Bogdanovich is introducing the movie, and it will not surprise you that Peter Bogdanovich is talking about conversations he had with an old great filmmaker. Not a huge surprise. And Bogdanovich is talking. He talks about Jean Renoir, and he says that Renoir's assessment of Lubitsch was basically American filmmaking was all copying D.W. Griffith and all trying to looking at D.W. Griffith as the model for we didn't call him auteurs then, but what an auteur director is. And when Ernst Lubitsch comes along, he not only brings a more European sensibility, but he is much more of a subtle and deliberate stylist. And pretty much anybody that would become one of the great filmmakers of the next generation, of the 40s, the 50s, what have you, we're looking at what Lubitsch was doing and going, oh, I want to be doing that. Like, I want to be, in a way, not to be pat, but like, Lubitsch is kind of like an almost Velvet Underground kind of thing. If you're just like, oh, everybody from all these disparate places was still looking at what he was doing and going, oh, that's clever. I could take that. I could take this. I could take that. As opposed to Griffith, who I mean, but besides the argument about Griffith not being nearly as much of an innovator as people claim he is, D.W. Griffith is not a subtle guy at all. There's nothing, if there's symbolism in D.W. Griffith's films, it's unavoidable symbolism, right? It's a mother rocking a baby in a cradle representing innocence. But Lubitsch is doing all these little things and all these little tricks and getting away with so much, especially because he starts out pre-code. And obviously, Trouble in Paradise is a perfect example of a pre-code movie. I thought it was the most pre-code movie, and then I watched in prep for this Design for Living, the movie Ernst makes right after this, which is maybe the horniest movie of the 30s.
Yeah, it's pretty great.
I'm watching it. We'll talk about Trouble in Paradise, but I'm watching Design for Living, and so they set up the premise like Miriam Hopkins, who I'm now a huge fan of. Can't decide between Gary Cooper or Frederick March. So they're all going to live together. And I'm like, I get what they're implying. And then she turns around and goes, so we'll live together. We'll all be in the same place. I'll be your friend. I'll be your muse. But no sex. And I just went, oh, they just said it. Just outright, just said the words. You have to imagine that Will Hayes viewed Ernst Lubitsch as perhaps his mortal enemy. Like, Ernst Lubitsch was the Joker to Will Hayes' Batman.
He was Stone Cold to his Vince McMahon.
Right. I mean, Lubitsch represents the European sensibility of filmmaking that's soon going to take over Hollywood.
Yeah.
And the just, I mean, because I think Lubitsch definitely brings something so fresh visually and stylistically. You got to remember, this is the time when Lubitsch is coming out of the German filmmaking scene, same generation as Billy Wilder, his buddy who would write scripts for him, his same generation as Robert Siodmak, who directed The Killers, and they're all are learning from Fritz Lang, and have already are steeped into the expressionist tradition, and they're having to use low budget techniques to skirt around, just to get their movies made. And just why, 'cause I hadn't seen this one before. I hadn't seen Trouble in Paradise before. And it was the first thing I noticed was just compared to the other Code movies that are on there that are, the other non-Lubitsch Code movies, just how visually interesting everything looks, just from transition to the way the camera moves to the set dressing of everything, and just how Hans Dreyer just dressed the shit out of everything here.
Because some of it comes out of the fact that he was dealing with constraints, right? His lead actor was missing a leg, so he couldn't shoot him walking much.
Which explains why so much of what's the actor's name? Marshall something?
Yeah, Marshall. Crap! Now I have it written down. I just completely
Herbert
forget.
Marshall.
Herbert Marshall. Yes.
As our own Gaston Montesquieu.
Yes.
Yeah, this is the reason why he's in so many static shots, just standing over something.
And they use a double when he's running up the stairs. Yeah.
I was gonna say, it leads to some pretty funny, almost you'd see in a sketch comedy thing today of well, that's clearly not him running up the stairs.
Right.
Just he immediately closes the front door and he's halfway up the stairs already, and okay, that's a good bit. That's pretty funny.
Yeah.
It's not like I was gonna come in and say this wasn't a visually interesting movie, because it's a very visually interesting movie. But I think the thing that really impressed me, and I think is what made Lubitsch so influential to a lot of filmmakers after him, and it's something that ties him in with Billy Wilder, who he'd work with and who made movies very similar to this and Ninochka and other things, is that this is an amazing script.
Yeah. And
I feel like this is not to be oh, well, old movies are bad kind of rant or whatever, but we're 5 years from The Jazz Singer. Cinema up to this point has been dominated not by their scripts, by their visuals.
Right.
So, yeah, D.W. Griffith was influential because he was the guy coming up with the craziest visuals that you can imagine in this early art. And then it's oh, well, we can do the visual stuff now, but people are talking in these movies now. We can get a little more, and I guess this is what the European influence is with all the guys you mentioned, like Lubitsch and others. This feels more influenced by, literature and
Yeah.
the written word than, which even to this day is an American thing, spectacle. It was all about spectacle. And this
Right.
is, it's a visual, very good looking movie, but it is not spectacle. It is dependent on the written word and how the performers, deliver these wonderfully constructed words and jokes and all of it, that in 32, not even just because of the pre-code stuff, just for like, wow, 5 years ago we were blown away by Al Jolson singing on a
Yeah.
screen, and now we have people essentially doing more elevated intellectual, not to denigrate it or anything, but like more intellectual versions of vaudeville routines. They're doing
Right.
wordplay, goofy like things where they're just teetering right on the edge of saying something filthy, but they don't. So
Yeah.
Well, singing is a great point, Tom, because it that brings in another important element when talking about Lubitsch at this time, which is, you mentioned like, oh, he gets them to deliver the line. It's about how they deliver lines. It's the rhythm, and the
Yeah.
reason the rhythm's so important is it's worth remembering. Yes, the jazz singer is the first picture that has, well, it's the first popular picture that has sync sound, but the jazz singer is not all talking or all singing. The first all singing, all dancing, all talking musical spectacle is The Love Parade, which Ernst Lubitsch directs with Maurice Chevalier. And there's actually most of the films he's making at this point, up until this movie, are Maurice Chevalier musicals. Now, obviously, we haven't done a Lubitsch Chevalier musical on the show, but we did last season do Love Me Tonight, which is the Ruben
Oh, wow.
Williams Chevalier. And those required that same kind of rhythm and that same kind of, pattern delivery. This is Lubitsch's first film. He obviously works on like he makes 2.5 films this year.
Mm.
He also makes a drama this year, I think called Broken Lullaby, which is an admirable attempt. And he also does a segment for an anthology film called If I Had a Million, which is it's an almost entirely forgotten movie that only David Bluvband, myself, and like 20 other Letterboxd users have apparently seen.
It's on the Criterion Paramount pre-code collection right now.
Yes. Yeah.
And it took me a minute to realize. I didn't realize it was an anthology until I saw the part with Charles Lawton, which is supposed to be like famous. He like won the Academy Award for that role, I think, right? Like,
well, it was that they separated that segment out and started running it as its own film.
yes,
So the Lawton segment.
That's
It's
obviously the best one.
Yeah, Tom, to give you a sense, dude, If I Had a Million is just an anthology film about this rich old man who decides, like, I'm going to give my fortune away to random people. I'm just going to pick random people and give them $1 million, and then they just let a bunch of directors come up with, what do you want somebody to do with $1 million? They're not all great. The second best segment of the film is W.C. Fields and his wife deciding they're just going to crash cars into people for fun.
Right.
But the best one is
in it too.
Yes, and
Right,
and Charles Lawton's segment, like David describes, is it's Charles Lawton is like a menial worker at some business. He gets informed that he's getting $1 million. I think he gets a letter, or no, the guy comes to see him and just goes, "Oh, you're getting $1 million." And Charles Lawton gets up from his desk and he walks upstairs and he goes to his secretary and wordlessly just kind of, she waves him through, and he goes up, and I think he gets to another secretary who waves him through, and he just keeps going up and up, higher in the building, and he finally makes his way all the way to the office of essentially the CEO of the company. And he walks in, opens the door, looks at the very busy boss, and just goes, and leaves. And that's the whole segment. That is Ernst Lubitsch in a nutshell. Is like, it's really just about, like, he understands the rhythm of it and the way to sell that gag. And that all comes out of that musical background. And I think that when you watch Trouble in Paradise, it's been described as a musical with no singing. I mean, there is an opera sequence and there's a jingle being sung at one point, but it really is, it's every element of the musical comedy except for the songs.
It seems like he was the first guy, maybe one of the first guys to realize that, like, yeah, like there's a rhythm to music, and wait, if we're making musicals, we got to have a rhythm to the editing. Oh, editing there's a rhythm to that. There's a musicality to the editing.
Right.
So like instead of just having bare bones kind of just functional editing, let's use that to heighten what's going on, which is, I'm sure there were other guys who probably thought like, oh yeah, music and editing, blah, blah, we could do that. But just because you're the first guy to maybe think of it doesn't mean you're Ernst Lubitsch. He got it and he did it. And this is, if it wasn't so clearly filmed like almost 100 years ago at this point with a beat up film print and rougher transitions than we might be used to seeing the film transition to another film reel, whatnot.
Sure.
It's so incredibly modern. A lot of people talk about comedies these days. They don't have a visual style in anything. It's not great that you could pull most comedies that are made today,
Right.
which are really pretty much only made on Netflix at this point, and compare and contrast them to a movie made in 1932 and say, you barely look more modern than this 91-year-old movie. You might want to rethink some things because this guy has made a movie that's aged a lot better than your 2.5-hour improv fest, which everyone's going to forget in a week. Sorry, Judd Apatow, but nobody's watching The Bubble.
Just to double back a couple points of just like what in the newly explored realm of the sound era, you have like the 30s is the first generation where the screenwriter becomes a celebrity. The screenwriters, like, people are into, like, this is when that rat-a-tat dialogue and that musicality of the comedic delivery is really popularized. Like, this is the same way Preston Sturges wrote. Lloyd Bacon had made movies around this time that were very like, this is the same. My favorite movie from the 30s, My Man Godfrey, where there are just these really tight scripts, class differences mostly, that people are hungry for in like early Depression era America. They want to laugh, and they want to see rich people be made fools of, and to be subject to ridicule and to be scrutinized. They want to see like really smart commentary of what's happening around. To like add on to what you were saying about the musicality of everything, and Lubitsch's musical background, and like, yeah, this is also we still are making Gold Diggers movies. These are still like, we're coming out of this, like you said, like everything is expressionist, or not expressionist, but like it's theater actors playing to the back of house on screen in silent movie makeup. And now we're really only starting to approach more naturalistic acting for the first time. Like, I agree. I agree with you, Tom. Like, there's so many comedies that don't work right now, that are not. They don't feel half as fresh or half as funny or half as tight as a movie from like 90 plus years ago.
And I will say, and we have to read the statement from the registry. I think we've gotten so far. No, it's not your fault. Like, all of us dove right in, and I just noticed. I'm like, oh, this is probably the longest we've gone before the setup. Before we say anything more about Trouble in Paradise, let's talk about what the Library of Congress had to say. Here's what the National Film Registry says about Trouble in Paradise. The Lubitsch touch, an easy comedic elegance which characterized the films of director Ernst Lubitsch, is epitomized in this frothy gem starring Herbert Marshall and Miriam Hopkins as professional thieves who fall in love while plundering the Riviera. Saucy dialogue delivered with mock melodrama runs rampant amidst the sophisticated promiscuity when Marshall is bewitched by the wealthy Parisienne he intends to fleece, Kay Francis, and the thieves find they're not as thick as they thought. David, you're absolutely right to mention the Great Depression being a factor in this. In fact, it's more of a factor in this film than modern audiences realize. One of the things, when Tom's talking about like comedies that don't work, I think there are so many comedies from the last like 20 or 30 years that don't hold up, in part because they're relying so heavily on pop culture references and things, things that
Yeah.
date them immediately. This movie also has pop culture references, and we've talked about other classic comedies that it's not like they're bereft of pop culture references. It's just the fact that even though we don't get them anymore,
Hmm.
there's still enough gags in the movie to sustain us. Back in season 1, Riley Soliner was on talking about Modern Times with us, and there's a lot. I mean, Modern Times is a timeless comedy, and yet there's gags in that. At one point, the main actress like puts a knife in her mouth and looks like a pirate, and that's a direct reference to the Black Pirate,
Right.
starring Douglas Fairbanks. No one's getting that now. Similarly, with Herbert Marshall's character, he has a line in the film where he says, he goes, "Oh, don't be down. Prosperity is just around the corner."
Yes. Yeah.
And we could see that as just a line. And honestly, when I watched it, I'm like, that's just a line. But then you dig into it. Prosperity is just around the corner is a phrase that Herbert Hoover was saying.
Yeah.
In reference to how government's not going to be able to pull us out of the Depression. And so if you're watching it in 32, it's essentially like, somebody referencing, I don't know, Covfefe or something.
Yeah, no, it's a very hashtag of the moment thing to say. Like it's also that's a very it's the same exact line that's in My Man God.
Yes, yeah.
The top of the movie.
It's just one, it's like Mike said, so many movies now rely on pop culture references as the joke instead of using the moment itself to fuel the comedy. This uses the moment to fuel the comedy instead of commenting on the moment. It's clear.
Yeah.
You don't have to be a real historian to realize that this is set in an era of economic despair.
Sure.
So many scenes of, oh, you're not cutting. You got to cut back on salaries, but not on our salaries. Blah blah blah. It's you don't need, but it's moving. It's using it to fuel everything else instead of like I saw, the Super Mario Brothers movie this weekend. Cute
Sure.
movie, it was fun. But it does that thing that the Illumination movies do, which is always annoying. More so in this one, which is just like, oh yeah, we're doing the Mario Kart scene. What should we do? I know, let's play Thunderstruck by AC/DC. Why?
Yeah.
Well, one, that's annoying to me because I just want to hear Mario music. I'm a grown man and I'm going to admit that. I just need to hear Mario music.
Sure.
And two, I don't think the 8-year-olds that are seeing this movie really have the biggest interest in little Australian men dressed like schoolboys. That's just me. I don't know. Mike eats burgers that are branded by young people. He might know better than me.
That's such a weird description without context. Somebody's going to be so confused. Yes, Tom, I ordered Mr. Beast's burger, okay? I am a journalist and I'm required to know about these things. So
you could have just said Mr. Beast made a burger. He made a burger. How interesting. Didn't need to eat it.
I'm a thorough journalist.
But like contrasting to like, a lot of the other movies that haven't aged well. A few weeks ago, I rewatched Wag the Dog.
Oh wow. Oh yeah.
And that feels so not in a lot of ways, but very much in this is a Clinton era movie, but it never says Clinton. It never specifies anything that would lock you into the 90s other than some like cell phone jokes, like moments, not even jokes, just like, oh, do you think we get reception here, whatever. But it just uses that political era to get to something that has aged incredibly well. It aged so well. It came out, I think, 2 weeks before the Monica Lewinsky shit started dropping. So it's this is one of the earliest examples in the sound era of don't lock yourself into a time by saying everything that people will laugh at for a week.
Now,
use it as fuel for something to get at something deeper and truer, which is it's fun to see European criminals rob European rich people. I don't know. That's timeless.
It is, and I will also say just on the subject of just like everything in its time and within its context, and this is a movie about a gentleman thief and pickpocket, and this is an era when like we are still in the era of like post very cheap genre fiction being pumped out, and like there's
Arsène Lupin and all that.
Yes,
right?
yeah. There's exactly. The
And
Gentleman Thief
Fantomas,
is
yeah.
a very like the Gentleman Thief is a very like recognizable archetype in fiction at this point. Still, it feels more arcane now, but it's almost like I wonder like it's almost like they should be making a movie instead of just like a super like if you're gonna make a Super Mario Brothers movie, let's like just make fucking Trouble in Paradise with Super Mario Brothers.
Well, I mean,
With those characters, just like have a story that's kind of similar.
I mean, I
so
will.
obviously Mario is the Gaston character.
Yes.
Because I need to dig into this. The two men that are being cucked by the heiress, obviously Wario and Waluigi. I mean, it's obvious.
Exactly.
And in that case, Edward Everett Horton is the Waluigi, and Charles Ruggles is the Wario, right?
Obviously.
Obviously.
Bowser is the guy at the heiress's company who's clearly a thief. He's Bowser. What else do we got?
We got Luigi. Luigi is who would be Luigi?
I mean, unfortunately, I would counter that at this point it's possible that Luigi is the Miriam Hopkins character.
Oh, that's
You know what I mean?
Yes,
That's the original pairing. Hey, we were both lowly plumbers.
Yeah.
Now you've found this rich princess.
Right.
I don't want you breaking up our thing, right?
Yeah.
And then Kay Francis is the Princess Peach.
Yeah.
I gotta say, there's very few original things out there anymore. As culture grows, it becomes more derivative. But I dare say this is the first time people have dared to say, where would the Mario characters fit in Ernst Lubitsch's Trouble in Paradise? I'm willing to say. Now,
and that is why we are breaking new ground, and
Yeah.
why there is no other podcast like us. And if you're not listening to us, listen, fuck yourself. I mean,
That's how we get on those iTunes charts, baby. That's why we're there. I will say the other thing about that when we're talking about the time period, this movie does feature one of my favorite character gags from old movies that we don't get anymore, which is pre-Cold War communist jokes. Insofar as like after the Cold War, communists and Marxists officially become like big scary. And the funnier thing for me is, and it happens throughout like 20s, 30s, and 40s comedies. Like obviously Ninochka's a great example too. But one of my favorites is there's a football musical called Pigskin Parade.
Yes.
That again, 7 living people have seen. But it's a football musical, and one of the running gags in it is that there is one like Marxist on campus. And again, as opposed to how anybody with communist leanings is depicted after the Cold War, this is a clear archetype they're using, which is that guy who's read too many books, who shows up and no matter what the conversation is, shows up and goes, well, fellas, Antonin Gramsci had thoughts on this, and then they throw him in a trash can and knock him away. And it's a good gag insofar as like when you look at Depression era comedies, one of the things they get at that no comedy that tries to deal with class now does is like comedies that try and be class satires now often try to have a specific perspective, right? Where they try and go like, well, this is actually the correct answer. Whereas like what the Depression era comedies do so well, whether it's My Man Godfrey or whatever, is mostly just going, most of these people are frauds. Most of these people are bullshit. I mean, like people often, when they bring up that, people use that comment about temporarily embarrassed millionaires to describe Americans, and it's attributed to John Steinbeck, but that's not John Steinbeck's quote. John Steinbeck's actual quote is him saying, we have no one in America admits they're proletariat. Like he goes, some of the most vocal socialists I know chase people off their lawns and don't give anyone a dime if no one's around. And he's basically talking about like, it was a broader example of like, yeah, man, like I'm out here chronicling the Dust Bowl.
Right.
I'm also getting big checks from my books, and I'm not pretending otherwise. He goes, but the richest people come up to me and go, yeah, I have solidarity with the cause. No, you don't. You have too much money to have solidarity with the cause.
Sure.
You're telling me you feel for Tom Joad, and then when Tom Joad is on your lawn, you call the cops on him. You're a fraud. I think that that's what this gets so well is like it's essentially, it's not just a satire of, oh, rich people are dumb. That's a lame target at this point, right? Like, we
Right,
can make that
right,
joke, but it's a lame target at this point. There's a reason why Adam McKay's satires don't land as strongly as he thinks they do. This gets more at the idea of just like, oh, everyone's kind of deceiving themselves in one way or another,
right. Hmm,
right?
hmm.
Including our main thieves, right?
Yeah. Yes.
Including Herbert Marshall and Miriam Hopkins at various points, who are completely lying to themselves, and Kay Francis, who you arguably throughout the film are going, does she know she's getting scammed? Like, does she
Kate
care?
Francis, man, that this performance, I'm kind of new to this her filmography, and she's so funny. Like, this role is very, very funny and very, like, feel like this movie has been recreated many times over in different genres. It's sort of Dirty Rotten Scoundrels, but it's also sort of The Hustle, and it's kind of Bonnie and Clyde, and it's like it just plays with this idea of our two anti-heroes trying to just get to the next biggest scam, and like trying to pull, but this one ends with it working out. And it's like very funny, just from that last frame of just like, wow, it really it really all kind of worked out for him.
And the other dynamic that this has that the others don't, I mean, it has two things that I think it does very well that those other comedies mentioned maybe don't always get around to, which is most times when you're doing a thing about like, these two, low level crooks, and one of them gets drawn into a life of wealth and privilege, and the other one's trying to pull him back. And all that. They do two things that this movie doesn't do. One is they often posit it as, well, the rich woman that the man is now falling for. He's got his partner in crime gal who's like the down for anything, rough and tumble type. And the rich girl is pure and virtuous and pure of heart
Mm,
and this and that. And it's like, the implication that often comes up in those comedies, especially when you do the opposite genders and all of that, is essentially like, the guy having a, this complex about her being, that his old flame, yeah, they were hooking up all the time, but this girl, she's pure and virginal and innocent and this and that. And that is not Kay Francis's character at
right.
all. In fact,
Nope.
so much of her attitude and her attitude toward him is not just, oh yeah, we're sleeping together, but her vibe is, yeah, I know it's good. I know I'm good at this, and that's what keeps you coming back, which is
Right.
wild. And the other element I think it does that's so fucking smart is from the get-go, they tell you she doesn't care about money,
Right,
right?
right.
Not just that she's irresponsible with money, she doesn't give a shit about money,
She just
which
doesn't
means
think about it.
which
Yeah.
means you take out that cheap component that happens in so many mistaken identity comedies. Like we know the guys, we all know the blank check guys, Griffin and David, and they always talk about the problem with so many rom-coms is they have to have that second act where she
Mm,
finds out about the deception and she's distraught and this and that. You never worry about that here in terms of like, she doesn't give a shit about money,
right.
so you never have to worry that even if he pulls off the heist, you never have to worry about her caring. It doesn't bother her at all. So it takes out that tension and you can just enjoy the game of it, right? Because it is just
Mhm,
a game
mhm,
to all of them, which I
mhm.
think is, when we talk about these modern versions, whether it's a Dirty Rotten Scoundrels or what have you, like they always include those beats.
Yeah.
Well, this is the pure of heart, and well, they're the good world, and I don't know if I belong in the good world or this and that. Whereas with
Yeah.
this, it's all a game.
It's formulaic. It's definitely something that became formulaic, and I think the formula sort of solidified with one way over time, just based on like, again, this is like we're coming out of the Roaring Twenties. There's just like a different sensibilities, and like, Imogene Sarah Smith on the Criterion Channel has a great introduction video to this to the Pre-Code series up there, and she talks about how it's like, well, these movies are often there's so many female driven movies from this period
Yeah.
that are challenging the projected quote unquote norms or standards put upon women, and are like, so many movies from this time feature women who are like, free spirited, and are not like, they have agency. They're not subjugated to like, the stereotypical roles or whatever. They're very like free, and a lot of fun characters. Like there's Carol Lombard in My Man Godfrey.
Yeah.
You've got Kay Francis. You've got
Miriam Hopkins in Design for Living.
obviously you've got Miriam Hopkins in this, and Design for Living. You got Mae West movie.
Yeah.
You've got like a lot. You Jean Arthur. You've got a lot of movies about women that are trying to make it on their own, and like in a man's world, and like take that idea and flip it on its head.
Well, I think there's also something to it being a depression era movie, and that it's almost subtextually saying like it's okay to rob her because she's too big to fail.
Yeah. Yes.
That
Yes. Yes.
there's no way us poor people who are struggling for work are going to be able to topple these big businesses. They're going to survive. They'll cut all our jobs and say, "Oh, things are tough. We're tightening the purse strings," but they'll give themselves bonuses. They'll buy $125,000 franc handbags and
Mhm,
lose
mhm.
it and offer up a reward for it. But you're never going to topple them. So there's something innocent to their whole scheme, because like Mike said, she doesn't care. And she doesn't care because she doesn't have to care.
Yeah.
Because like everyone that's that rich in the world, they're never going to not be rich. And so
Right.
them just ripping her off for what ends up being 100 grand plus the handbag,
Mhm.
they were going for almost close to $1 million. She didn't give a shit. She was gonna be fine. She would have just had another round of layoffs,
Mhm.
and she would have just been like, whatever. I
Well,
gotta go cuck some
but
majors and naval officers
but
again.
the other element too in this, and David's point about like those pre-code liberated women kind of idea, and this shows up in last season's film we talked about, Love Me Tonight, too. An element of Kay Francis's character is that she married rich, right?
Yeah.
She had a
Yeah.
husband, she married rich, and there is this vibe that comes up in a lot of these films from this pre-code era where it's not just about a wealthy woman born into wealth. Like if we see that woman who's like from the aristocracy, she's the women in the Marx Brothers movies who are getting clowned on. But
Mhm.
there's this specific archetype of like this woman who did not come from money necessarily. She is virtuous, she is whatever. She married wealthy because she did what she had to do. She did what she had to do to survive. That guy's dead. And the
Mhm.
dynamic they always set up is, well, shouldn't she get to have a little fun? Right?
Right.
Like
Right.
whether it's Chevalier in most of his movies where it's like, oh, this is a young, sexy widow who is married to an old man. Shouldn't she get to have fun? Or Kay Francis in this, where it's like, yes, she doesn't want Edward Everett or Charles Ruggles because she wants a guy that can, that I mean, yes, he cares about makeup, he cares about all the finer things in life as well, but also it's a sexual component, and these other guys are
Yes.
essentially eunuchs. Like to David's point about these liberated women in this particular era, even the original script for Trouble in Paradise, she was even shown as even more kind of virtuous.
Mhm.
Where there was a scene, you remember how the old woman shows up before the Marxist shows up and starts yelling in Russian, which I did not have time. I wanted to ask my partner if she could translate what they were saying for me, and she did not. But um, when the old woman shows up and she offers her what is very clearly not her purse,
Mhm.
in the original script, Kay Francis takes the purse anyway and gives her the reward, just because she
Mm.
knows she's on hard times. And I
Sure.
think that Lubitsch decided like that was a little too much,
Yeah.
but there is just something to that where it's like it's not just that she's rich, it's the specific type of rich where it's like they've got money, but they're still one of us, right?
Mhm.
This
Mhm.
era will still punish people who are born into privilege, right? That are unaware of their privilege. In fact, Miriam Hopkins, I don't know if anybody here has seen it. If not, seek it out. And hint, hint, I'll be talking about it later in the episode too. Miriam Hopkins did a film the year after this that is called The Story of Temple Drake.
Okay.
That was so scandalous in its day that it is essentially the movie that is credited with getting the Hays Code enforced.
Oh.
It's not a comedy; it's a drama, and it's in fact like when you read about what the original script was that the Hays office came in and was like, "You can't show this." You do sit back and go, "Oh my god, yeah, they could not have filmed this." Story of Temple Drake is kind of the opposite of the Kay Francis character. Like this, it's about a well-to-do judge's granddaughter. It's based on a William Faulkner story, and she goes out and she's carousing on the town, and she goes out with all of these guys. And she always flirts with them, but she never sleeps with them. And one night she's out, and the guy has a drunk driving accident and crashes his car. And they get stranded at some low-down, low-class building with a bunch of hoodlums and mobsters there. And then one of the mobsters violently sexually assaults her.
Oh, God.
And in the movie, it's upsetting. Because in the movie, they're pretty blunt about it. Apparently, the original script for this film that Miriam Hopkins was on board for involved her being violated by an ear of corn. And then the script called for us seeing the corn afterward. And the Hays office went, absolutely not. Which I dare say is the one time I go, you're on it, Hays office.
Yeah,
I'm with you.
I'm
with you,
kind
Hays
of on
office.
their side with that one. That's one where they I'm glad they didn't let that one slip
That is,
through.
yeah, but so what I'm saying is like, and it's very much a morality play. It's very much like going, hey, you don't understand the ways of the world. I think that it's important to note with Kay Francis that even though it is still a liberated woman thing, even in this time in pre-code, there was still this unspoken thing of in terms of class of like, if somebody's rich, they're only on the level if they came from where we're at, right?
Yeah, sure,
Like,
of course.
even in the Depression, there's this interesting thing in these films of like, which I don't know if we necessarily have it now when we're dealing with our modern day class struggle, which is this idea of like, look, the generationally wealthy people all suck and they can go to hell. I'm not going to begrudge anybody who was one of us and got theirs. That seems to be a prevailing thing in Depression era films, is like this idea of, nobody's necessarily sitting back and doing the, well, why isn't Kay Francis donating all of her wealth to the soup kitchens? It's like, oh, listen, she got out. She got go to town, buy your bags. We don't care. You were one of us. You did what you had to do. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, no, definitely. If it's definitely like it's definitely a smart choice to not have her be a little bit more sympathetic. I think just because of a tonal, it wouldn't fit. It's a little too giving her the reward money is a little bit too earnest of a game move to fit with the tone of the movie. It makes it just I mean just like My Man Godfrey. It's funnier to see them be more broad and like have more broader value.
Well, it also just makes her more. It makes the pairing of her and
Yes.
Gaston make more sense, because at a certain point you realize, oh, she's conning him.
Yeah.
Because she wants that dick.
Yeah,
But
no,
then
exactly.
she wants the dick so she can blue ball him, because that's the game she likes to play. She wants to drive men crazy. It just makes her the perfect foil. And you just, up until the very end, you're just like, fuck, maybe he should stay with her, because she is enough of a weird shithead just like him that their weird kinks might fit, even if it's not exactly there, not both pickpockets. There's still a weirdness to them that makes sense. But then you get to that final scene.
It's a classic kind of relationship that you see where it's just like, all right, well, these guys are so weirdly broken in their own different ways, and they probably shouldn't be together. But right now, them being together keeps them sort of out of trouble a little bit. Like, just like,
yeah,
well, all right, they're gonna be okay for, like, I guess right now, but it's still not like super healthy. But I also want to just bring up the point of like these characters, these female characters that we're talking about, these rich women who are these rich women who are again all, mostly written by men trying to like drive men crazy, or these rich women who are exploring different aspects. Like these are all characters from literature that were very popular at the time. These are F. Scott Fitzgerald characters. These are all like character. This is Jordan Baker. It's like it's these character these very exciting for the time, especially female characters who are challenging the social norms of the time, or the social, whatever you want to call them at the time. And that is for an audience that doesn't like we said before, is coming out of the silent era where we don't see those characters. It's very exciting. And they're and producers obviously know these are the things that are driving people into the seats. You'd like to see characters like that they
And
don't get to necessarily.
And it's also, with Kay Francis, the other thing that this does that's so clever is it would be very easy to write her as where the gag is she's rich, so she's out of touch, right?
Mm-hmm.
What Lubitsch does so well throughout this film is you could read her as that, but you're not sure. And the perfect example is she has an incredible line where when Miriam Hopkins is playing all modest and pretending to be just like a normal secretary, and she's like, well, I have to take care of brother because mother died. And Kate Francis goes, that's the trouble with mothers. You just start liking, just when you start liking them, they die. Or something along those lines. And what's so great about that line is that just like her character throughout the film, you don't know, is she that clueless, right? That she says something that's so that to a normal person would be fucked up? Or has she been through so much and does she have such a dark sense of humor about it all that she knows how fucked up that joke is and she's intentionally doing? You know what I mean? Like,
yeah, I think I kind of chalk that up as to like another, like to me is like okay, like there's lots of lines like that in my man Godfrey as well,
yeah,
or even in To Be or Not to Be, just the clueless privilege of just I don't really I don't really believe in policing what I
yeah.
say. You see these people now, like this type of attitude that's just like they'll just say stuff that sounds totally insane and they're oblivious to it. And that's almost like more real than a lot of other eccentricities about these characters. Like I feel like, you know, like Hey Francis has a lot of lines like that, obviously. Like Sullivan's Travels is just
Yeah.
filled with lines like that. It's just a whole movie about that. And or I do also want to bring up back to that scene of just like when Miriam Hopkins, who's so funny,
Oh, she's
who's
incredible.
so ridiculously funny in this movie, and she does that thing that I love of like my favorite type of con in a movie with cons is pretending to be a dork
Yeah.
or like a nerd or like some sort of waif of some sort, just be like, well, my brother is sick, and just like and just like the big glasses and everything. It's very. I feel like you see that in like. I mean, you see that in like Bogart does it in The Big Sleep.
Yeah. Yeah.
You also see it in like stuff where like it's a thing that carries over to today, because you also see it in like fucking what was it, Hobbs and Shaw with Vanessa
Yes.
Kirby. Like he's just like,
Yeah.
hello, I like 2 tickets for the. It's like very like, okay, oh, this is an enduring bit that people do in con, in
Well,
like
see,
in the con artist world.
my favorite part of that whole scene is just how clearly Kay Francis is just like, no, you leave at 5 o'clock because in her mind, I'm getting that dick tonight and you're not getting in the way. Just the look of unabashed horniness is so just it's so goddamn funny. And to Mike, what we were just saying before about you don't know if she's being clueless or if she's I think she's saying shit like that on purpose to make it even more like this is the kind of shit Gaston is saying in his cons to
Yeah,
people.
yeah.
Like
It's also
it,
like I think a very I think this is one of the earliest times of like that type of behavior being like like archetypal on screen of just like because we all have some friend that just like I'm just gonna say something pretty crazy right now just to get the reaction of
Yeah.
like people and just
Yeah.
like I mean it's like most that's like shit posting now on the internet and just like you have these characters that I feel like are also like very indicative of the rich and the privileged of just like it's a one type of it's a commentary on those types of echelon of people who will just say kind of insensitive things mindlessly and will just like but you know what thoughts what do you guys think of it? Like
But and what she does so well is throughout the whole movie, you really never know where she's at. Like I said, we
right
know that she married rich. We don't know her background really outside of that. And what I do think with her and the way that she talks to both Gaston and to Miriam Hopkins' character, because remember, we set the template of this movie, which I think is so brilliant. We open with a gondolier, which is a great sight gag.
yes yes
That anybody else opens on the most beautiful sights of Italy, and this movie opens on I'm gonna dump trash into a gondola, which is a great bit. But we open with Hopkins and Marshall conning each other
yeah
and being able to spot each other because we can always tell, right? And there is this thing, and look, not to give anything away, but obviously Tom and I now we work in media. We get invited to and have to go to a lot of kind of high profile events. We've gone to Fashion Week events and things like that. And even in just 2 sentences from the way somebody talks, you can always tell which people had to lift boxes in a stockroom for a number of years and which
mm.
people had their dads get them the internships. You know what I mean? Like we can spot each other pretty quick. And what I think is so interesting about Kate Francis's character is when she has those lines and she does these things and the way she talks to Gaston a lot, you do get that sense we never actually know when she knows that something's amiss, right?
Mhm.
Because we don't have an emotional reaction, because she takes it all very well, even when he's like, I stole your necklace. She's like, good on you. Yeah, that makes sense. Like, and what I think about that is you do get the sense in those scenes, like when she's talking to Miriam Hopkins, right? A modern movie would play it more obvious, but it is very possible to read that scene as her essentially potentially testing Miriam Hopkins, being like, he works too long, but you're going to go home as though to be like, listen, I know what's up. If you don't want to admit it, that's fine. We can keep doing this. Like, I'll play along because it's fun for me too, but I'm going to needle you. And again, it does feel like when she talks to both of them, as opposed to when she talks to the board, right? She talks differently to Gaston or to Miriam Hopkins than when she talks to the board. And part of that does feel a little bit like, listen, man, I know what's what, okay? Like, listen, I had to seduce the old rich guy to get in this position. You're having to seduce me. You had to seduce him. We all had to do this game. So I get it. We're on the same page. I think that's so fascinating.
Yeah.
I do also, look, we talked about the script. It's an incredible script. There are so many notes that I took that were just good quotes from this movie, most of which are followed up by me noting this is the horniest movie ever. There is the exchange that they have when he turns around and goes, Madam, the way you spend money, if I was your father and I saw you spending money like that, I would give you a good spanking. Business-wise, of course. And she goes, well, what if you were my secretary? What would you do? The same thing. You're hired. Good punchline. Incredible punchline.
It's
Great bit.
I mean, it's very, very smart and funny. There's also something I noticed of like, there's sort of an Amy Poehler-esque performance with Hopkins.
Yes, yeah.
That I noticed. I was like, oh wow, I can definitely see like there's some of this like you said, there's a modern sensibility to a lot of these comedic movies from the time, but it's also like I can see like you can see the formations of other things like bubbling up in the zeitgeist of like, oh okay, yeah, I can see like this is this Miriam Hopkins role is only a few years before eventually Carol Lombard would become this type of character and like dominate.
And Miriam Hopkins too, like I do think about this because I was researching her after this movie, and obviously she does Design for Living the next year, right?
Yeah.
And she does Story of Temple Drake the next year.
Mhm.
And she really feels like one of those people. You know, we talk a lot about actors from the silent era whose careers died because of the advent of sound.
Yeah.
Miriam Hopkins really feels like somebody who, like, her archetype and her career was demolished by the code. Like, she seems like a
Yeah.
woman who could not function in the code. And in fact, if you look at like her most notable roles, she's pre-code with Trouble in Paradise
Right.
and with Design for Living and Temple Drake. And then the next most popular film she's in is 30 years later
Sure, sure.
in The Children's Hour,
Yeah,
right?
yeah. Oh, yeah. I forgot
Which
she's
is
in that.
you know, kind of scandalous
She's
film for its time.
wonderful. She's wonderful in that. That is a
She's
great
terrific.
role.
But it almost feels like she is an actress who can only work, and I mean this in the best way, can only work in projects that allow her to kind of touch a live wire, right?
Sure,
You
and
know.
sadly, she's not the only story of that.
No,
There's
no.
like Kay Francis's career also kind of like there's so many actors from the pre-code area that didn't really, that for a myriad of reasons just didn't cross over. And a lot of them didn't work for a long, long time and were only picked up by younger directors who were fans of their work,
Yeah.
which we see, a la Wes Anderson, Quentin Tarantino, like all the people, directors that do that. There's directors that do that, the Safdie brothers, directors that do that now. Like that's also something that's probably never gone away. Of just like when new directors pop up, is like, oh, I love this actor. I
Well,
haven't seen him in forever. I
because
want them in
those
my movie.
those people were the only ones finding those old movies, right?
Right,
Like,
right.
Trouble in Paradise is buried for decades, right?
Yes,
They're not,
yes.
you know,
As was many of the Code movies at the time. They
yeah.
were never screened on television. If they were heavily edited.
I mean, the story of Temple Drake is literally, I mean, it comes out in 33 and then is not seen again until 2011, basically.
Sure, sure.
Like,
Yeah.
that's insane. Like, that's insane to think about. And I
Mhm.
think that these directors, the ones who are really passionate about films, are the only ones seeking out these reels or have the ability to find these reels.
Right,
And
right.
I think one thing we forget when we talk about the Hays Code, is we forget that people liked it. And I'm not saying the Hays Code was good. I'm saying it in the sense of, like, we have this idea in our heads when we think about the Hays Code that it was a thing where the government just on its own decided, we're going to have movie rules. And the public
No.
went, we don't want it, but we can't help it. No. These things were, the pre-code movies were toxic for a lot of people. And Hollywood was, that whole Hollywood Babylon thing, that was considered,
Right.
toxic to people. And
Yeah.
there was a lot of very strong moralizing for decades afterward with a certain type of film audience that was
Well,
not only like, were these movies objectionable, but if you made these movies, you were objectionable.
gee,
Yeah.
that doesn't sound familiar at
considered it.
all.
No.
Doesn't
Yeah,
sound
right.
familiar at all. We're not dealing with it at all at
Right.
any point in time. Anytime two people kiss on screen, we don't get a week of discourse about how those characters didn't consent to being watched on camera, which is, a
Uh-huh.
totally normal thing for a person with a fully functional brain to say. It's that's one of the fucked up joys of doing this show, is just seeing the circuitous way that everything works. That time is just a wheel. Ka is a
Yeah.
wheel, as Stephen King puts in his books. And just the
Right.
point I wanted to make, because you guys said Miriam Hopkins had a very Amy Poehler thing. Is it just me, or does Kay Francis? Am I saying that right?
Yeah, Kay Francis.
She's got an Eva Green thing, right?
I
Who's
could see that.
I
Ava
don't
Green,
know.
Casino Royale, the more recent Casino Royale.
Right.
She's like if Ava Green was a goof.
Yeah.
She's just as horny as Ava Green,
Sure.
because you watch all of Ava Green's movies and you go, oh, that woman is aching for it. One of the best scenes in one of the dumbest movies of all time is the sequel to 300, where she has a fuck scene, which is just totally deranged, but she is all in.
Sure.
In more ways than one. Heyo.
See, now, David, what I like about when we have you on is that as represented by us talking about If I Had a Million and and Pigskin Parade, and then Tom talking about the 300 sequel. When you're on, it's a trifecta of people who have seen movies that no one else has seen.
Yeah.
It's just a great trifecta of people where our listeners go, I didn't know that existed, and I don't think anyone should know that existed.
Listen, everyone should know the 300 sequel exists because it has the single worst cut to credit song of all time. It is a pro-war movie that ends with the credits playing to War Pigs by Black Sabbath, the very virulently anti-war song. Guys, everyone was on the ball that day.
So funny.
The edit bay was getting their paychecks and earning it that week.
Well, listen, Tom, I got to get you to watch Pigskin Parade because I just want you to try and fathom that there was a football musical starring Judy Garland, and also one guy plays a big dumb jock who kicks the ball very good, and that's his only character, and he's just a one-note joke. Right. And that guy got an Oscar nomination for Best Supporting Actor for that year.
Amazing.
Well, listen, I support any character that's very Nigel Gruff. Anybody that there's a clear line between that and The Replacements, so I'm always a fan of that. Now you're just making me wish that Burt Reynolds made a football musical. He made a few football movies in his day. He tried the musical thing a few times in his day.
It's very he didn't cry. Yeah, they didn't ever try to get remake Pigskin Parade. And again, football's a new sport at this time. Yeah. At that time, it's like I watched The Freshman, the Harold Lloyd movie.
We covered that last season. Yeah,
yeah, and I was it's another thing of like all these things that feel. They have different contextual meanings now. It's just like that movie's all about how just like college was an aesthetic.
Yeah.
Football was new. It was like all these things are just like you were talking about the communist. This guy has read too many books. Intellectual that talks too much archetype is pretty much invented in the silent film era as like an archetype of like, look at this fucking college know-it-all jackass trying to make me feel stupid or whatever. And same as it's these are all the new zeitgeisty things in the same sense of like how movies will often feature characters who are podcasters, or movies will feature characters with like AI going awry, or like these things that are just like this is something to do with Bitcoin, or some sort of like
getting a GameStop stock movie soon, guys. Get ready. Not joking, it's actually happening.
Exactly. No, perfect example. Like all these different like just ripped from the headlines things that are like they say more about our society that we make movies about them almost as much as the actual events do.
Well, and it's like that happens in older films. It's one of my favorite things is to find those things. I mean, my partner and I, we recently went through every Disney animated film, and I'm not talking. I want to be clear. I'm not talking. Oh, we did the animated features, like a nostalgic. No. The old shorts. We went back to the Alice shorts. We did all that because those, when you go back and look at that, they are satire, and they are referencing things. There is an early Mickey Mouse short where Clarabelle Cow is seen sitting in bed reading a book. And they show you the cover of the book. I forget the title of him, but they show you the cover of the book. And then Horace Collar walks by, and she hides the book under her pillow. A normal human being, I assume, looks at that and goes, okay. But of course, I had to figure out what that book was. And it turns out that that book was a scandalous erotic novel in the 30s. And it was like, it was the equivalent of a 50 Shades of Grey gag today.
Yeah.
Like, that's what that book was. So they're doing a bit in this 30s cartoon that is essentially like, Clara reading 50 Shades of Grey and then hiding it under her pillow because she doesn't want anybody thinking she's reading anything disreputable or anything like that. And that's,
well, I mean, old cartoons are great, are like the original BuzzFeed articles. They are very like Looney Tunes also are like wall to wall reference of the time gags that blow over most people's heads now. That if you are also like me and spend time like, wait, what does that joke mean?
Yeah.
And research is like, oh, okay, oh wow, this is like littered with jokes I'm not even aware of.
And
Like,
I mean, to bring it back to the Freshman, I remember there's a gag in the Freshman where they're trying to tell you like, oh, the dean is a taskmaster, and they
mhm.
have a line on a title card that says like, he makes Simon Legree look like an angel.
Yes, yes,
And
yes.
Simon Legree is like the villainous slave master from Uncle Tom's Cabin.
Right,
So in
right.
that episode, I say like that's like evoking Darth Vader, because
Yes,
for
yeah.
the culture of the 1920s, Uncle Tom's Cabin
Topical.
was Star Wars.
Yeah.
Not just topical, like that was the most popular book in the country. Like that
Mhm.
was
Now,
everybody's thing.
now I'm truly just imagining what a world it would be if
So
Disney
afraid of where
Plus
this is
had
going.
to announce Uncle Tom's
So
Cabin
afraid of
Disney
it.
Plus
God.
shows. No, listen, I'm just
you mean
saying.
okay? You mean okay? Yes.
If Disney Plus existed back then and they needed to announce, if it's that time Star Wars, all of the spin-offs, how did he become an uncle?
I mean, I will say this.
Who in his bloodline is named Tom, where he got the name Tom?
But here's the crazy
How
thing:
was the cabin built?
around that time, you kind of get that, because since copyright wasn't nearly as strong, and also
Right.
you had no idea what was going on in other states,
Mhm.
especially in the South, Uncle Tom's Cabin, this is off topic, but Uncle Tom's Cabin starts to become like when the Italians started making sequels to movies they didn't own.
Yes,
Hell
yes,
yeah.
Like how there's well, I
100%
mean,
like
in this case, less hell yeah, but still, like they basically take Uncle Tom's Cabin and like, look, this book is really, really popular. People want to know what the story of Uncle Tom's Cabin is, but also they're going to be real pissed off when they find all this anti-slavery stuff. So what if we stage a play and we just kind of change some of that, and we
Yeah,
kind of tone it down, and Simon Legree becomes, one bad guy as opposed to an indictment. And what if we start writing fake sequels where he comes back, where you're just
Mhm.
like, what the fuck are you doing? It is deranged how many like weird because that book was a phenomenon, and that's one of those things. We talked about it on My Darling Clementine. I talked about Zane Grey's Riders of the Purple Sage, right?
Yeah.
And that was the book of its time. Like Zane Grey
Right.
was Zane. When we think of the 20s, we think of F. Scott Fitzgerald, and we think of Hemingway. We think of the writers who have survived, but it's it's the same way. Like when people talk about like, I don't know, literature in the 90s, they'll talk about like David Foster Wallace and Dave
Mhm.
Eggers in the 2000s. But really, if you're like, what were most people reading? It's Stephen King and Dan Brown and Tom Clancy and
Right,
like
right,
these guys.
right, right.
Zane
The
Grey
genre
was like,
stuff.
yeah, and Zane Grey was the Stephen King of his day. But what you see when you look at a Zane Grey is you look at he's actually doing some interesting stuff when it comes to women. There's some progressive ideas in there,
Yeah, yeah.
and then the westerns that come afterward and are derivative of that take all of that away.
Mhm,
They
mhm.
also take away a lot of the adamant we should shoot Mormons, which, okay, in that case, I get why you reel that back. Zane Grey,
I don't know.
real
I don't know.
anti-Mormon.
I don't know. Think the guy's got
It's
that guy's got something.
Tom, it is it is truly one of those. I mean, and look, and I understand. Like when you look at the book, you're like, right, Brigham Young just died like 10 years ago when this book
Right,
was
right,
written.
right.
Like
Clearly
at
there's
this point, Mormonism in Zane Grey's books is like Scientology, right? Like
yes, yes.
it's just,
Which is
it
also fascinating to put it in that context of like, wow, yeah, this was very new at that time, and it must have sounded ridiculous and like sort of like what the Book of Mormon, like what the South
yeah.
Park guy did of like when they heard about like all the Mormon stuff and like just like being so close to like, wait a second, you thought Jesus Christ came to America? What are
And
you
it's
talking
like
about?
he ends up writing a sequel years later to Riders. This is again not related to Troubled Riders, but he writes a sequel to Riders years later. That is this because the Riders of the Purple Sage essentially just paints this Mormon sect cult that's in town that wants to kidnap the main woman and make her one of the elders' wives. And Zane Grey
Mm,
kind of paints it as like these are just weird creeps who want to marry a lot of women. They
yeah,
don't
yeah.
believe what they're saying. And then Rainbow Trail, which is a sequel, is Zane Grey going, looks like the younger generation actually believes this religion. and doesn't want to just marry a bunch of women. So I guess it's cool. I guess it's fine. And
Now,
yeah,
imagine if Big Love ended with a cowboy just coming in and just shooting all those Mormons. Bill Paxton, how dare you marry all these women?
Tom,
And
guess what?
Just start shooting them up.
I haven't watched it yet, but there was a Riders of the Purple Sage adaptation in 1992 with Ed Harris in the main role. And I am so fascinated to find out what they do with that adaptation.
Listen, if you're going to make that into a thing in an era where Ed Harris is alive,
Right.
you are legally obligated to cast Ed Harris in the movie. It's just it has to happen. If Ed Harris wasn't in it, I mean, just burn the negative.
Oh, yes. I see. Yeah, it's you have to have Ed Harris in a movie like that, because that's like that. I mean, you tell me that premise, I think of Mormon revenge western, where it's one Mormon's journey into discovering how he can is he gonna go on that fucking Last House on the Left quest of like, do I kill you because I have nothing left, and does that make me me now you? Because I've done what you've done.
David, I got news for you. Riders of the Purple Sage is public domain. There is literally nothing stopping you specifically from writing this sequel. You are legally allowed to do it. No one can stop you.
Put Mickey Mouse in it.
That's next year. You can't do that till next year.
I mean, talk about this. This sounds like a Super Mario Brothers movie. Now that we're talking about it, I mean, like, just
hey, listen, they just set the record. You know, somebody's got to break the record. Records are made to be broken. So I think we cracked the code to beat Mario and its record-breaking opening that was only made for babies and not the geniuses who like the Sonic movies.
I would love to make the Super Mario Brothers sequel. I'll take that helm, and I would like to do it the same way of like it's just a gritty rehashing of the first movie, where it's not like it's more of a spiritual sequel.
I thought you were implying you just do Riders of the Purple Sage.
Yes, exactly.
So it's yes. So guys, if you're listening to this, by this point, David and Tom have already been arrested on the Universal lot for waving a script that says Koopas of the Rainbow Road. They've already been detained. We gotta just roll with it.
It's very Peckinpah-esque. There's a lot of
it's set in Mexico.
Brutal killing scenes. It's set in Mexico. It's very we've got real criminals working on set for like.
We roped Chris Christopherson to show up, and we pulled him out of mothballs.
You didn't like Chris Pratt as Mario? We got a different Chris for you guys, and you're gonna be surprised how he sounds.
Yeah. It's Danny Trejo.
Oh, Danny Trejo should be the Luigi to Chris Christopherson's Mario.
Oh, if only Warren Oates was still alive to play Bowser.
That's Bowser. That's the guy. Like, I love Hopper's Bowser personally, but or his King Koopa. But like Warren Oates was the actor that was always meant to play Bowser.
Hang on, David.
Bring me the head of King Koopa.
I'm so off topic that Kyle's probably making feverish notes now. But David, do you know about the first actor to play King Koopa in live action?
No, who?
It wasn't Dennis Hopper.
Oh wow. Okay. What was
for
this,
a period of time? There was a localized to Los Angeles only kids television show. I believe it was called like King Koopa's Super Cool Show or something like that. And I believe cool is also spelt with a K. But they put words in between it so it doesn't become like the Krusty show at the Apollo. If anybody remembers that incredible bit, when Krusty the Clown walks out at the Apollo with a stage with 3 Ks and just goes, "Oh no." Anyway, and I believe they also did the Ice Capades, Super Mario themed. So all before that, at the Ice Capades, King Koopa was played. It was a TV special, the Ice Capades. King Koopa was played by Mr. Belvedere. You can look it up. It's just Mr. Belvedere in a big plush Bowser suit with green face paint on his face.
What year would this have been?
This is like mid '80s, I
Pre
think.
the movie, right?
Yeah, oh yeah, definitely pre the
Yeah.
movie. This is back when this was still a weird fad. I believe I texted Tom the picture of Belvedere Koopa once without context, and all I got
Mhm.
back was why.
Nah.
And it wasn't clear if it was why did you send me this or why did this happen. But it was
Right, right.
definitely a why.
Um,
Back to Trouble in Paradise. I have a
Yeah.
few things I want to add from that film that I do. There's some other bits that I loved, and we can but there is two incredible sex jokes in this movie.
Mhm.
Uh, one of which is when Herbert Marshall has taken over and he's giving everybody instructions, and they decide to have the instructions he's giving Kay Francis
yeah.
is bending aerobically and then
Yes.
going, "Is this how you want it?" Like what a and then the one that I love that I do look at and I'm like, why is no one doing like some of these gags I get it, they don't work with them, but there's one where I'm like, I've never seen this shot done again, and it's such a clever
Mhm.
shot, which is when they're talking, him and Kay Francis are talking, and he's bouncing around them to kind of show like they're talking about hooking up, and he just gets a shot of the empty bed, but with their two heads in shadow on the bed.
Mhm,
Mhm.
And
mhm.
it's such a good and I'm like, how has this not been copied 1,000,000 times?
Right,
Like,
right,
that's
right,
such
right.
a perfect, subtle gag that says so much. There's all these little, like, go over your head kind of, body gags. Even the start. The start of the movie is an image of a bed and the words "trouble in," and
Mhm.
then a pause before it shows paradise to very clearly say, "trouble in bed." It's, like, from the
Right, right,
get-go,
right.
these little gags. But, anyway, I just wanted to make sure I highlighted those little, those little bits that I love.
I mean, it's always just delightful to see such explicit dialogue, but it's also super smart and, that the rat-a-tat
Yeah.
pacing and the very, like, the double entendre. But, like, it's also just, there's this is an era where, again, like, obviously, we're talking pre-Hays Code, filmmakers are really trying to see what they could get away with, and also, like, we really only have a tradition of literature and theater at this point. Theater has a couple of, like, you know I know there were, like, not, like, Hayes-esque, like, but there were, like, always, like, "Oh, this was a controversial play," or, like, "This is a controversial book," and books, you can still, like, books, anything can happen in a book. You
Yeah.
can literally write whatever you want to happen in a book, and movies become the first thing where it's just like, well, suddenly people are policing these.
Well, in fairness, a couple years before or a couple decades before this, James Joyce is getting banned in the US.
Yes, yes, of
You
course,
do
that's
have those
and
rare
you still
exceptions.
have that, but, like, it's also, like, the Hays Code is coming at it's like
It's the first
it's like
uniform form of
policing on the
censorship.
internet.
Yeah.
It's like, when the internet was unruly, when the early days when things had to be people realized that things had to be monitored, and people realized that things could get out of hand if there was no boundaries
Yeah.
to but like you also get this time. I just want to say, like, some of my favorite things of this movie of these movies that I don't know quite how to articulate, so I'm just gonna try and like vocalize it. Like, there's something super hot about, that very, like, two characters, saying these, like, this, like, intimate dialogue, or this, like, really funny, like, dialogue, and then just cutting to an old phone ringing.
Yeah.
There's just something incredibly sexy about that, of just like, "Oh, wow. Who's on the line?" Like, I don't know, like,
Yeah.
just there's
Yeah.
something about just, like, just, like, all this rat-a-tat dialogue, all this, like, it's very sexy, and then you just cut to a phone, like, just a like, just a phone with the, receiver ringing, and it's just like, "Oh, wow." I don't know, something about that is very interesting to me.
I mean, on that note, that one of the other great, sex gags is early on when they're in Italy, they
Mhm.
realize they're into each other. They put the "Do Not Disturb" sign on the
Yes.
door, and then the next thing you hear is oh, and it cuts back to the Italian guy singing on his gondola.
Yeah, that was slick
Great
too. That was fun.
gag. Just oh, what an incredible gag. Tom, what's your favorite sex joke in this movie? We've all gone around here at this point.
Honestly, it's probably the one you said before of when they're like replicating the routine of yes,
Yes,
Mr.
yeah.
Gaston, yes, and just I guess I must have looked at my phone for a quick second because I thought it was the maid and not Kay Francis. But just seeing bend over with that grin on her face, and I'm just like, okay, this movie fucks. You know,
Yeah.
and you know what? Guaranteed, Mike Myers loves this movie.
Oh, for sure.
I 100% think Mike Myers tried to at some point like I mean I was you know what I was thinking about when I was watching this movie. How I Married an Axe
Yeah.
Murderer
Yeah.
has
For
like
sure.
Yeah.
a lot of similar moments to this movie in terms of just like this is really funny rat-a-tat like insane dialogue and and like really like very funny. We're like we just started dating and are getting to know each other like lines of like that are very reminiscent of this movie. I definitely wouldn't be surprised if Mike Myers had fancied himself like I want to like transition to an Ernst Lubitsch part of my career.
I mean, I think there's so many of those people of the 90s, 80s and 90s comedy directors who are like that because there is that element of, you know, they're not aping like like I said, you're Mike Myers and a lot of that like SNL era guys. They're not aping the comedy of 10 years ago. They all
Mm,
grew up watching Abbott and Costello and Ernst Lubitsch movies and all of those comedies on television with their parents or their grandma or whatever, and they have that base of knowledge. And whereas at the time that was what everybody was doing, it somehow felt fresh at the end of the 20th century because nobody was doing it like that anymore. It's like I was listening to so he's a wrestler of all people. His name is RJ City. He hosts a talk show for AEW now. He's very funny, but he talked about he goes, they're like, "Oh, you're so funny. Where does your humor come from?" He goes, "Well, my humor seems like new and clever because when I was a kid, my grandma was like, you have to watch Abbott and Costello Meet Frankenstein. You have to watch
mhm.
these Don Knotts movies. You have to watch these old comedies." And he goes, so then I would go to school and assume that everybody had seen them, and they
Sure, sure.
hadn't. And so I kind of got to sort of morph that into my thing. And I do think like Ernst Lubitsch isn't talked about the way that a Hitchcock is, or a Kubrick is,
Mm,
or anything like that, or even the way that a Howard Hawks or a Preston Sturges is, right?
yeah.
He doesn't get brought up that way. And yet, his work so informs so many generations of comedic filmmakers,
Mm.
Well,
you know?
that gets into another conversation, which is that for all the bitching and moaning people today make about how horror movies aren't respected, comedies are the genre that I feel has for the most part been ghettoized. I mean, they don't
Yeah,
even
yeah.
really make them as movies in theaters anymore. They almost rarely, even more rarely than horror movies or genre movies, don't get awards contention. So, all the directors you said that have lasted, Hitchcock, Howard Hawks, all those guys, they made genre movies. Those last. Comedies, everyone's like, yo, I loved it. And then 10 years later, nobody's really, comedy's a weird thing where it could really affect somebody, but then, and it's kind of, I kind of fall into that pattern too. Abbott and Costello is some of the funniest shit in the world. But when I
Yeah.
think of my favorite movies or the directors that inspired me, whatever, something in my mind, I never think of comedies. And I think a lot of people are like that. I can't explain why. Unless you're in comedy, improv, stand up, what have you. Unless you're one of those people, it's almost like you can't think of comedy in a like quote unquote legitimate way because it's not, it's something that everybody can enjoy and not just the grown-ups or something like that. I don't know. It's interesting.
I feel like when I was growing up, there was, and I'm sure some of you can maybe like speak to this, but like I feel like comedy used to be thought of as universal, like people can just. But I think now it's more understandable that comedy is more subjective and even localized than we were willing to give it credit for. Because like I think there's so many things that people don't have in common in comedic in regards to comedic taste. We in this room like these movies, like love these types of
Yeah.
movies. I know plenty of people that really don't pay attention to any of this type of content, or like who like their comedy is like 90 Day Fiance, or even like their idea of comedy is not even like, I was at a wedding very recently, and I was talking about what people were watching, just with like what made them laugh, what comedies they were watching, and one person just said Great British Bake Off. Like the idea of comedy, I think, is so fractured now, of like just what people of like comedy is not necessarily like the genre that we think of. Comedy is just what people watch to, like, if it's not scrolling Twitter, that's just like comedy is like
Well,
what they do to unwind. And some people just cannot handle, I think, like a lot of, what was it, very few comedies really get made now. I think the few that get released theatrically do terribly,
yeah.
like Bros, which I really enjoyed, but didn't like, nobody went to see. Or the movies that I like that are really good, I still don't know that many people. Like, I liked Barb and Star Go to Vista Del Mar a lot. I liked Palm Springs. These movies that have pretty solid premises that are also very funny, character-driven pieces. I know people who have said, "I couldn't watch it; it's too stressful." And so it's very like, I think there's just like, I don't know if it's just like a culture thing right now, where I think plot really stresses a lot of people out right now for whatever
Well,
reason,
I
and like,
think
which is why
there's.
Mario did really well.
I
I
think
don't
with
know.
comedy, I mean, I'll say this, and I've said it before on the show, but I think with comedy, it's also we're in a time when the biggest thing we're lacking in terms of audiences is introspection.
Mhm,
Art
mhm,
requires introspection, and comedy especially requires introspection, and that is why I think, like, when you look at the comedies that the Oscars have honored recently, because Tom said, well, they don't get Oscar recognition, we keep forgetting that, like, every year they've nominated a satire for Best Picture, but those satires are empty. They're
mhm.
Adam McKay doing Don't Look Up, or they're Ruben Östlund doing Triangle of Sadness, and the
I would
reason.
say, like, Everything Everywhere All at Once
Yes,
could
that
be
is.
argued as maybe the
I
most successful example of, like, a
Absolutely.
comedy.
But I
Yeah.
think that comedy requires introspection, and I
Yes.
think that the reason we used to enjoy, I hate to say this, like, we used to enjoy comedies, but it really was a thing of, like, to go back to the one-off communist character in Trouble in Paradise, right? Look,
Mhm.
we were dealing with tough economic times,
Yeah.
and there were probably a lot of people who went to see that movie who not only sympathized with that character, but probably agreed with that character's beliefs and were still able to go, "Okay, we can kinda be blowhard assholes sometimes." Right? Like, there
Mhm.
was the ability to kinda go, "Alright, you know what? We can kinda be," like, whatever it is. You went to a comedy and you expected it to satirize, you expected it to some degree or another, satirize you, right?
Mhm.
You had to have some degree of introspection because the hope is you come out of any work of art, but especially comedy, having a slightly different perspective, right?
Mhm.
Having a slightly different perspective on things. And now, I think when you talk about people say, I couldn't watch that, it stresses me out too much. Like, yeah, it's partly people wanting to know where something's going to go. And it's
Yeah.
also wanting the safety of the validation, right? It's the safe.
Right.
I mean, look, I really liked Everything Everywhere All at Once. I really do. But, we talked about it on our Oscars special. Like, obviously, even the directors had to come out and be like, some of these fans are way too intense about the
Yeah.
be nice message, and they're yelling at people who aren't nice. We need to relax. And I think
Yeah.
that that's kind of what it becomes. People just attach so much to this and just want the validation. And I think that's why these comedies now don't work, is people don't want to go to something that's going to make them laugh at themselves. They
Yeah,
want
yeah.
to go to something that's telling them, we all agree that these people suck, and that's why we're gonna make fun of them. And it's like,
They're
well,
too
that's not it.
stressed out to really, like, feel like they're too stressed out to really be challenged about how they, like, which I think is a very, I don't wanna sound like an old man right now, but that I do feel like that's a I don't know if that's, um we gotta be okay with not feeling good about
Yeah,
ourselves, or like
absolutely.
not feeling like that we are virtuous 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Like, we have to be okay with the fact that there are negative aspects of ourselves that we don't like, that we have to challenge to see if we are even like, do we still value these things? Or like, now it's very frustrating to satirize anything in media because you have a very vocal audience that can respond back and affect in an executive's mind, can affect potential sales of your product. So you have to curtail everything very sensitively now, especially if it's like Nazis. Like,
Yeah.
yeah, you cannot even say that Nazis are bad in movies anymore. They have to. Because you can't defend them. God forbid you offend like the right wing or the alt right, like shit posters of the internet. And like,
But
you,
but to your point, but conversely, on the opposite end of that, I know plenty of people who, like, I was talking to somebody actually about To Be or Not to Be, right? The Ernst Lubitsch company, and they were just like, I don't think you should joke about that. Like, the Nazis were bad people. Like, I don't think you should, like, that shouldn't, like, that's not funny. And I'm like, well, when you watch it, like, you see that it's funny, and they're like, no, I just like, I think about like all of that, and I just think like, especially now, like, it's not the time to like make fun of the Nazis. I'm like, okay, but I need you to understand that the people that made this particular movie knew the actual German Nazis and had to flee them and were having bricks thrown at them.
yeah,
If they want to make this comedy film, I don't think we in the 20s get to sit back and go, I don't know if they no. If anybody has license, it's the Europeans who fled to Hollywood in the 1930s. I think they have a
yeah.
grasp of what that was like then.
It is a bit of like a just get over yourself type of a situation where
Yeah.
it's just like, well, you didn't make this, and also you like, I think there is like a very, I mean, I'm kind of an impossible person to talk to sometimes with this type of mindset, but it is like a thing of like, why did you react that way?
Yeah.
Why did you have this? Is it like, because I don't think you reacted because of the way you think you react. You reacted because of an internal fear you have about why you should or shouldn't like this.
Yeah.
And I mean, I feel like all the time people get really stressed out when they have to be challenged on why they like something within the context of a movie, and it really bothers them as opposed to in a way that really perplexes me of like, how do you enjoy art?
Yeah.
It's all just validation. I heard a great story today about when John Cassavetes saw A Place in the Sun. He saw it, he walked out, he was so pissed off and angry at the movie he just watched, he ripped up his ticket and threw it on the floor and started stomping on it and said that was the worst movie I've ever seen in my life. He then proceeded to buy a ticket and go back in to watch it again. He watched it 6 times in a row, and by the time he was done watching it, he said, that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to make movies. This is now my favorite movie of all time. Now, kind of perfectly to what we're saying, he had a reaction. Something poked at him. He didn't know what it was. He was really mad. And he said, I got to go see it again and figure out what the hell is getting at me so bad. And by the time he was done, he had some introspection and he changed his life and he changed cinema. So guys, what I'm saying is if you ever watch a movie and you're so mad at it, watch it 6 times in a row and,
Yeah.
just shut
Tom,
the fuck up about it.
Tom, how are your other 5 viewings of Triangle of Sadness going for you then? By your own
well,
standard. You bought the Criterion, I'm assuming, right?
No, but my plans to finally eliminate Ruben are underway, making Kyle's job so much harder for him.
Take that, society.
I've got you again, society.
Yeah, but it's also this thing of, we were talking about the Hays Code before, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think that, and when you look at some of the commentary online now, you have older people who maybe know what, looking at some of these, comments of younger people who, don't know any better, but they're still like, you guys understand that you're advocating for a new Hays Code, right? Like, you get that that's, and the problem with that is, just like with anything else, and we talked about this way back on our Chinatown episode too, which is like, when you go to actual therapy or when you have an addiction that you actually seek treatment for, yes, early on, they are going to go, hey, if you can't stop yourself from drinking and this is really hurting your life, for a while, we're going to have you not be in bars and not be around any alcohol. And that's the first step. And then the second step is, and now you're getting there. We want to get you to the point where you can be around people who are
Right.
having a beer and it's not going to fuck you up.
Right.
Because if you don't have that second part, it just becomes prohibition.
Right. Right.
And
right.
much like with the Hays Code, like, yeah, understandably, like the MPAA is fucked up for a lot of reasons. But fundamentally, I do understand the idea of being like, listen, if Hollywood wants to be able to make R-rated movies with R-rated content, we want you to know whether or not you're taking your kid to, like, G-rated Oliver or X-rated Midnight Cowboy. Like, you should have a sense of what you're getting into. That's a compromise, because if you don't have that and you don't have and you don't offer guidelines for people to be able to process things that are challenging, then the only thing you do is prohibition, right? And the Hays Code is a perfect example of prohibition. It's a perfect example of going, this stuff makes people upset and sad, so lock it away. No one should have access to it. And I think that, when we're talking about especially with comedies and things like that, like, yeah, there's a lot of hacky people who make bad jokes about things or just can't land them. But at the same time, it's like, maybe we all need to be able to just laugh at things sometimes. You know what I mean? Like, there is a difference between a joke that is punching down at somebody and a joke that's, like, people say, like, don't punch down in comedy, you only punch up, right? I think we have a problem there, because you should be able to punch sideways. You know what I mean? You should be able to go, it's not just they're terrible, right? It's not just punching upward and going, these people we all agree suck or bad. You should also have the ability to go, we're also terrible sometimes. We're also, and like, you get that in certain ways, right? Like, you can watch, like, Tom and I love to send each other Sopranos memes because we both grew up in Italian-American households. My partner and I will talk about Marvelous Mrs. Maisel sometimes, and the Jewish families, and in both senses, like that, at least culturally, there is a way to go, listen, I respect my people and my culture, but also, we do some silly shit.
We do some shit,
and we can just laugh at that. Like, there is that ability in that one way.
I think that it's all about, like, it's all everything should be taken contextually, and also, like, if you're going to implement any rule, it should be for a reason, hopefully for the greater good. Like, for like, if if you're going to criticize let's say, what a comedian does, or what is it, like, what is behind are you criticizing them, like, because if you're gonna criticize someone, like, you could criticize someone like a Tony Hinchcliffe, who's not like who's like just um uh uh a troll, like, someone that doesn't do comedy, but someone that is using comedy as more of an assault on, like, quote unquote opposite values.
Yeah.
Or just like, well, I'm just trying to make a point, or I'm this genre of comedian, the dirtbag left, as they say.
Yeah, of course.
And like which is just the name for which is just like a name for the internet alt-right. And then just like the idea of, like, if the same with like with the Hays Code of like going back to that, you're like, this is also an era where there was no discernment of entertainment. Like, there was no, like, kids entertainment or adult entertainment. There was just the show. That was just like, kids were like, I think the first movie my dad ever saw was like The African Queen or something. Like, just movies that, like, and he saw it when he was like 5 years old. And it was so there's no entertainment for children. If you're gonna take your kids to most people just drop their kids off at the movies, and it was whatever's playing is just like what's gonna keep them entertained while I go do my job, or they it's the weekend or whatever. So you have kids that get exposed to a lot of violent things at the time. Like, my dad saw The Wild Bunch when he was too young. And like my dad saw like you know or I have so many friends or uncles that had seen things that informed their psyche
Yeah.
later on in life, and I think and that's what's like the Hays Code is a response to something that was like it was an overreaction. It was mostly propagated by the Christian conservative movement of this country, but it also spoke to something that was a universal truth that people could see, was that, hey, look, these racy jokes are great, but like my kid's saying this in
Yeah.
school. Like, I can't
And
I can't be like, there's gotta be some sort of line here. And as a like, if I was a parent, I would maybe understand that. Like like at the time, especially when like, the so-called morals were the mainstream.
and look, we're not going to fault the comedians for that all the time, and because even people who do comedy will
Right.
look back
People like
later and go, "I wouldn't make that joke." Like, for
right,
example,
yes, which is
and
also part of it, just like the acknowledgement, the learning, the going
yeah,
forward.
and I'm gonna go totally abstract here, but like, if any of us had spent years improvising as a part human, part aquatic creature hybrid that had to answer questions on the fly,
Mhm,
and
mhm.
just make up an answer real quick, I'm certain that even now they'd probably have days where they sit back and go, "Is there something out there where I said something that I'm gonna regret
Oh,
now?"
100%, yeah, I'm sure that person thinks about that all the time if I was that person, like, I know I would.
If I didn't wanna make Kyle do more work, I would definitely throw out examples, but, I as we wind down, as we always do, I will throw this to Tom. Tom, how do you think Trouble in Paradise did at the Academy Awards?
I don't think it did.
Yeah, that's the correct answer. Not nominated for any Oscars.
Wow.
As it was released in late 1932, my best guess at what it would have been nominated, because this was like the early, like, first couple years of the Oscars. They're
Sure,
actually
sure.
split between years, so it's hard to figure out. But my assumption is it would have been this year, where the Best Picture nominees were 42nd Street, A Farewell to Arms, I Am a Fugitive from a Chain Gang, Lady
Mhm.
for a Day, Little Women, The Private Life of Henry VIII, She Done Him Wrong, Smilin' Through, State Fair, and the winner, Cavalcade. Now, for context, 42nd Street, She Done Him Wrong, State Fair, and I Am a Fugitive from a Chain Gang are all in the National Film Registry. In fact, we just covered I Am a Fugitive from a Chain Gang a couple episodes that'll be out by the time this episode comes out. So you guys, if you want to hear me say how boring Cavalcade is, you can go back to that episode and find that. Uh, but otherwise, David, thank you so much for coming on.
Yeah, man, this was
You
great.
know, a rare
That was
three-peat
much.
guest, a fan favorite. So we're so glad we were able to make this happen again. Do you have anything you wanna plug?
Yeah, I have a podcast
Mhm.
now about movies called The World of Tomorrow with David Bluvband, where I talk about sci-fi movies with a guest and compare them to our modern times and the commentaries that they were making then and if they still hold up today. It's a sporadic show that I update kind of whenever I want on no set schedule, so the next episode will be TBD. But
David,
yes,
don't let Tom know that's an option. Do not
it
let Tom know that that is an option.
See, now this is interesting. I did not know the world could have anything good in it. So this is giving me some new outlooks on certain things, and we're gonna have to have a conversation
I'm gonna I'm
once
gonna get a
David
text
comes.
from Tom like next week or 2 weeks from now with him just going, "Listen, I'm just thinking do it like David's TBD." Yeah, but Tom, the rest of us are in the room right now. We're all on mic. We need you to come on.
Yeah, but I'm in New Orleans.
uh so David, and that podcast is anywhere folks get their podcasts, right?
You can listen to it
Yeah.
on Apple Podcasts, on Spotify, and Stitcher as well.
It's part of my it legitimately is in my gym rotation. That's
Ah,
I give my wholehearted endorsement of
Just like your podcast, his gym rotation is
is
TBD.
TBT. Well, David, thank you so much for joining us. Everybody else, stick around. We'll be right back with our picks for the National Film Registry. And meanwhile, off mic, I'm gonna tell David what that human fish question was.
I don't want to know. I don't want to know. Honestly, like, let's just bury it. Like, please.
The National Film Registry isn't some fixed object, frozen in time. It's always growing, adding new titles every year. These annual selections are made by the National Film Preservation Board, with members and representatives from organizations like the Academy, the DGA, and the AFI coming together to debate and decide. But they don't just pull titles out of thin air. They pull from the public, people like you and me, who can submit their nominations for the registry in the form on the Library of Congress's website. What we do, at the end of every episode, is have Mike and Tom pick films not yet in the registry that they feel should be, inspired by that day's topic. At the end of each season, those films will be formally submitted to the National Film Registry for consideration on behalf of You're Missing Out. The only criteria? It must be an American film that's at least 10 years old. Here are today's picks.
Originally, I had a different pick in this spot that led more into the romantic crime movie thing. But then in doing research for this film, this episode, I came across a film that I wanted, that I then made my registry pick, and then I came across another film that I felt more urgently had to be my registry pick. I'm not going to say what I was thinking originally because there's a chance that that's where Tom's head is at, because it is very much a Tom movie. So we might be thinking the same thing. But then I watched Designed for Living, the Ernst Lubitsch film, and I was like, oh, this has to be in the registry. This is great. This is crackling. This is very good. But then, just today, as extra research, I watched a film I evoked in the episode itself, The Story of Temple Drake, with Miriam Hopkins. Miriam Hopkins makes Story Temple Drake the year after Trouble in Paradise, and we talked a lot about the Hays Code on our Trouble in Paradise episode. As I said in that, The Story of Temple Drake is the movie that leads to the stricter enforcement of the Hays Code. It scandalized people then. It was buried until 2011, and then I think the Motion Picture Academy Museum did a restoration, and then Criterion put out a Blu-ray. But, it was lost for so long, so it's definitely a candidate for preservation on that alone. The way that the registry has been selecting films that talk about controversial topics and serious topics, it's incredible that a movie about violent sexual assault and coercion and murder on top of that and all of that comes out in 1933, and that we just didn't know about it for so long because it was so scandalous. There's some remarkably blunt dialogue in that film. I was blown away by this film, Story Temple Drake. I think it should absolutely be in the registry. It is an important part of film history, and an important part of film history that was actively suppressed for decades. So, Story of Temple Drake is my pick for the National Film Registry.
I'm just going to shoot from the hip here. My pick is going to be Ocean's 11, Steven Soderbergh's movie. Feels very similar to me in a lot of ways of its like pro-con artist tone. How it's very funny and very clever. A lot of good wordplay, dialogue, comedy, stuff like that. It's very visually inventive and visually just lush and lavish. There is a love story angle there. Obviously not as sexual. I mean, for a guy who broke out with a movie called Sex Lies and Videotape, I don't think Steven Soderbergh's ever had sex. His movies have been very sexless since that debut movie.
Tom, I think I don't want to cut in on your segment, but I think you're forgetting a very key Soderbergh movie.
What Soderbergh movie? Out of Sight?
Yeah, his most sexual movie.
I don't love Out of Sight.
Ugh.
It's good, but I don't love it.
Sexy crimes. Anyway, back to your segment.
Yeah, I don't know. This just felt I don't know. Ocean's 11 is just one of those perfect movies. It's Soderbergh's always been great at bouncing between artful, thoughtful movies and these populist, entertaining movies without ever losing his artistry. I feel like he's definitely of an Ernst Lubitsch school. Ernst Lubitsch bouncing around through different genres and what. And I wouldn't be surprised for a second if this movie was not something he was thinking about when making his Ocean's 11. I think it's we need more pro-crime movies in the National Film Registry. Pro-crime against rich, pro fun con artist, you know. Just wish there was just Julia Roberts had a little more come give me that dick energy that Kay Francis had. But otherwise, I think this is a good match. I think this will be a good double feature. And yeah, my pick is Ocean's 11. The fun one, not the Rat Pack one.
Ring-a-ding-ding.
Let's all go to the lobby, lobby, lobby.
Thank you again to David Bluvband for joining us. Next week, we're mixing up the show format and bringing you our first live commentary episode for the 1923 film Greed. Don't forget to follow the show wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks again for listening, and we'll see you again next time. Here on You're Missing Out.
They honor movies of historical, cultural, or aesthetic importance on the National Film Registry.